Finally, we have Noha Sedky. Noha is a member of the leadership team of CitySpaces Consulting. CitySpaces is committing to building lasting, livable communities with an enduring emphasis on social sustainability. Noha has a Master's of Arts degree in urban and regional planning and typically works on affordable housing, homelessness, strategic plans, and market research. She is the adjunct professor of community and regional planning and teaches a course on the history of Canadian housing policy, current issues and challenges, and the evolution of social and non-market housing. Please join me in welcoming Noha.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me to join you tonight. This is a really exciting time. It's the beginning of a community engagement process to which you are all contributing. One of the most important elements of a great neighborhood is really a place where residents have a voice and can participate meaningfully in shaping their community. And this event is a really great illustration of this. It's an opportunity for co-learning, co-sharing, contributing. So it's a great start to a community engagement process. Now, you've already heard that I'm a planner as well, like Gordon, but more specifically, I'm a social planner and a housing planner. And so my role on this panel is to bring that social lens. And there'll be some overlap with what Gordon was saying, maybe take a few steps to the right or left of what he was saying, but essentially it's the social lens to this story. Typically, because when we talk about great neighborhoods, we're usually focusing on green spaces, transportation, public art, and urban design often is the primary consideration. But all of these are critical. There's no question that's what makes a great neighborhood. But I would say they're all important because of how they contribute to the social sustainability of a place. In my view, it's actually all about social sustainability. A great neighborhood is only a great neighborhood because of the people that live in it and the quality of life experienced by those who live there and work there. So my goal, is that still okay? I couldn't see you. So my goal, then, in 15 minutes or less, is to make the case for social sustainability and describe maybe what kinds of places we want to live in, touch on how we get there, and offer up some examples. So wish me luck. I'll see if I can get that all done in 15 minutes. Let's start with a definition of social sustainability. A socially sustainable society is one that is just and equitable, inclusive, democratic, and it provides a decent quality of life for all residents. So there's a few things in this definition that are relevant, but I want to focus on quality of life to start. Bringing it back to neighborhoods, what I want to talk about is to what extent a neighborhood can support people's well-being and or improve quality of life. So the answer to that question, can we enhance quality of life with the built environment? Absolutely, 100%. There's a strong relationship between urban form and social sustainability. It's been studied and researched, and there's a lot of evidence towards that. So part of that is through open spaces or creating spaces between buildings, creating opportunities for social interaction. A lot of what Gordon was describing in terms of a downtown and facilitating that interaction, a mix of land uses and social infrastructure that fulfills everybody's needs, irrespective of what age they are, what income, what background. So social sustainability focuses on how people who live in and use a space relate to each other and function as a community. And it's about creating the right development, the right infrastructure to support that strong social and cultural life, creating opportunities for people to get involved, maybe like today. So what makes a great neighborhood? Well, the CIP, the Canadian Institute of Planners, holds this national contest every year. They ask the public, they invite them to nominate and vote on great places in Canada. And so I use their sort of framework. There's different ways to kind of look at a great neighborhood, but more or less they fall in these 4 boxes or similar boxes. So the contest looks for character, or in this case, the sense of identity or community, It also looks for green spaces, so having parks, active or passive park spaces that make neighborhoods great for kids, make neighborhoods great for grown-ups. Neighborhood association, so that's the buildings, the infrastructure, the spaces that help people to connect. And then mixed housing, so that's to ensure there's a diversity of housing types and people that live in that community. And in terms of what makes a great neighborhood, Richard Florida, if you know him, is a well-known urban theorist, was asked this question, and he based his answer on a survey, a big study that was done in the US on what makes a great neighborhood and what the emotional attachment to a neighborhood involves. What are the critical factors of that? And he said that there's sort of two critical factors. The first was a community that treats its residents fairly. That's all residents, ethnic minorities, new immigrants, low-income people, young, old, families, entrepreneurs, artists. And that's step number one. And in West Vancouver, some of you may be familiar with this report that came out. Mark was kind enough to share this with me, and I found it to be a terrific resource, the West Vancouver Vital Signs report that was published this last summer. It looks at the stats and the context in your community in West Vancouver and some of the responses, other ideas, solutions. Anyhow, what it identifies a number of really interesting figures and information. And the reality is that West Vancouver is already an incredibly diverse place in terms of ethnic diversity, but also in terms of income levels, abilities, and ages. So it's less about whether you want to create that diversity, but what do you do to support it, to embrace it, to encourage it. There's also another reality in West Vancouver. Gordon alluded to this as well, that it's internationally known and that West Vancouver has some of the most expensive real estate in the world, but it also has its share of low-income households. Maybe many of them live in Ambleside. And so this Vital Signs report said that 18.3% of residents were considered to be low income, and that's even a higher share than what the region as a whole has for low-income households. But I'm going to take you back to the two critical factors of a good neighborhood. The first, in terms of that emotional attachment piece, if you remember. So the first was that equity and fairness factor. The most important factor that they found in that survey was the quality of the neighborhood. Does it have open spaces? Does it preserve its architecture? Is it a beautiful place? Is it somewhere that you want to spend time? What kind of character does it have? Is it cool? So emotional attachment to a place, relates to all those things, the quality of life. It's also about the social ties that you might have in a place. So where does your family live? Is your neighborhood a good place to raise children? And in this community, do you have the ability to meet people and to make friends? Are there venues, programs for gathering that facilitate that? So then, if you have an emotional attachment to a place, why move? Why would you move? Well, what we know is that housing is one of the main reasons that people move. In West Vancouver, this is very much a reality. Other parts of the region too, mind you, it's not just about West Vancouver, but throughout the region, housing is a challenge. It's become a crisis in many senses. And it seems that there's less choice for all types of households, for young people that want to stay in the community that they grew up, but are unable to afford rents or homes to buy, or for older adults that want to downsize from their single detached house but don't have the options in the existing market, or maybe those that have special care needs, or those options that they're looking for aren't available locally. And I'm going to use the same demographics because they're so striking that in West Vancouver, in 2016, the census that came out, there was a decline in population, and compared to the previous census. So in the 5 years, you lost 221 people. So that might not seem very, very much, but when the rest of the region increased by 150,000 people, then, and West Vancouver is the only major municipality in the region to experience a population decline, well, then that seems to be quite remarkable. And the decline, the biggest decline, was largely with the 20 to 34-year-olds, the younger groups, which is to be expected. But it was also among the older adults, those 55 plus. So for some of us here.
Did you look at me? Yeah.
I looked over there somewhere. And we all have a story like that, whether it's yourself personally or somebody that you know, a friend or family member that is struggling to make it work and wants, can't find the options locally that meet their needs. And so what that says to me is we need to prioritize the housing solutions. And I'm a housing planner, that's my bias, but we do. It's about housing diversity, diversifying the stock, but creating choice. And how do we get there? Well, it's about creating neighborhoods that work well, and part of it is about your participation in these kinds of events and having a say in how your neighborhood changes and evolves. It's also about developing supportive policies, socially inclusive policies, policies that create a community that achieves social inclusion. So that's part of that, part of the equation. And what I mean by social inclusion and socially inclusive society, it's one where all people feel valued, their differences are respected, and their needs are met. So that's important, and that vital signs study actually refers to some of that as well, that all of us want to have that sense of belonging and get to know our neighbors and be connected. It's actually, and it's more than that. I mean, it's about a livable community is that kind of a place, is a healthy, safe, socially connected place. But it's also a more serious issue when we talk about isolation. Isolation among seniors has become a really serious issue. It's been described as a crisis. This is, the stats are from our Canada-wide, but West Vancouver is certainly not immune to this. And community design has a role to play in increasing social inclusiveness by creating spaces for gathering and social interaction, enhancing social networks. And some of that also needs to be targeted interactions to facilitate that exchange between generations. Many municipalities are working really hard on these types of policies and programs and initiatives, trying to create age-friendly policies. And that's all ages. So it's about programs and initiatives that are for the eldest in the community and for the youngest. Some of the examples of things they're doing, they're giving staff and council training in dementia training, or supporting programs that facilitate more awareness and interaction between generations. How else can we get there? Well, density, diversity, through housing and services. But you need the density to support the services, and you need the diversity to create the choice and accessibility for all households. So in terms of that mix of housing, well, what I'm talking about really is that a mix of dwelling types and tenures and densities. But that could be, so in terms of tenures, then rental housing, it could be rental housing such as in this image over here, where it's planned above a commercial spaces. It's also rental that's purpose-built and secured over the long term. So rental housing can come in two forms. It's the purpose-built stock, as well as that you can find in the private market through the secondary rental market. And municipalities have a role to play in facilitating all of those types of housing, all of those types of rental housing. And in the secondary rental market, it could be in ways through secondary suites, which blends nicely within existing low-density neighborhoods. Or it could be in laneway homes. This one's just up the street from my house in East Vancouver. Coach houses, granny flats, any type of infill. And when we talk about infill, then we're not just talking about rental. In this particular case, it's not a rental house. It was stratified and sold. But if you look at it, look at the scale and how it fits in with the neighborhood, it's attractive and it intensifies the land and the use, but without being too obtrusive in a single detached neighborhood. So part of this mix will involve intensification of lower density areas, and I think the important part of this story is that that we need to say that's okay. It's okay in my neighborhood. It's okay in my backyard. So it could mean that you take a single family home and you turn that property into 3 or 4 units. Or take 2 properties, I'll show an example, and turn it into a beautiful townhouse project that fits in with the character of the neighborhood. And I'll tell I'm remiss here, I really wanted to put an image, but I ran out of time to go take a picture of it, of a project at the end of my street, again, I'll talk about my neighborhood, where 2 lots with Vancouver specials that needed some attention, they needed some love, and they were assembled and redeveloped into a really attractive, simple design of a 9-unit row house project that scale and height and density fit really well with the neighborhood. But our neighborhood is right by a well-known public elementary school, and as soon as that project was completed, we had 9 families with young children that moved in and brought this incredible energy and vitality to my street. So it can work and it can fit. It could also be intensification at a higher density, a medium or higher density. And for Ambleside, this is also a question because there is an older stock of apartments and rental housing that is at risk of being redeveloped. So some of the policies need to be about looking at protecting that stock and making sure that it's replaced with rental, or that if it hasn't, it's not at the end of its economic life, that it still has, that is protected from conversion. So making sure there's new housing built for rental housing, and then a diversity of housing options, and then also making sure that there's housing that can accommodate people that want to downsize and leave their larger homes, leave their single detached homes. And it's housing that is across the affordable spectrum. So I think there's something important to say that while West Vancouver is known to be a wealthier community, it also has a role to play in facilitating non-market housing and supportive housing and housing for people with mental health issues and people with special care needs. These issues are not different in West Vancouver, they're just as prominent here. And there's a role for municipalities and senior levels of government to facilitate that type of housing. And I'm going to say this as well, I think there's also a place for affordable ownership products, and that's looking at ways to facilitate access to the market for those that want to buy a home here but can't afford to live here. The price difference and between what people's incomes and house prices in West Vancouver are such that it's almost as extreme as resort communities, and that's what a lot of resort communities have started to explore, and maybe there's something for that to consider in West Vancouver. So very quickly, because I've taken too long, I'm going to run through a couple of quick examples, and just so you know how I came up with these, I did I asked a question, I crowdsourced this, I think this is what you call it, but I'm aging myself by not knowing what that is. I asked on Twitter if anyone had suggestions for great neighborhoods, places that they would recommend that I bring forward. And some great examples came forward. There were some not so great examples as well, but I was selective. Mile End from Montreal was a good one, and it just looked like a really cool place to live. There's so much to do and such a variety of housing, and it just looks like a really vibrant and fun hipster neighborhood. And I've never been there, so I can't confirm that, but I certainly want to visit it now. Another one that I'm going to highlight that I did do a bit of research on and it was fascinating is New Rochelle in New York. It was voted the 13th best city a few years back in the US, and some of the stats, 26% of the population either walks or takes transit. It has incredible access to a range of amenities. 9 miles of shoreline, and it's full of ethnic restaurants and parks and sports fields, a haven for artists. But what's most interesting for me as a housing planner is it has such a variety of housing. The supply is so varied, from starter ranch-type homes to what they call colonial-era homes on larger, third-acre parcels, to really stately homes and with stained glass windows. But at the same time, there's co-op complexes and lots of multi-unit apartments and a range of social housing. And it was described as unpretentious and colorblind, which I loved. Students go to school with people from all walks of life, the wealthy students with those on welfare assistance, with new immigrants, and they all get along. And I think somebody needs to go and validate this, but it sounds like a great place. The West End, of course, needs no explanation, but it meets a lot of these criteria in terms of that diversity, that the coolness factor, the things to do, the incredible aesthetic and location. And then the Athletes Village is close to me because I spent a lot of my last year when I was on maternity leave and my older daughter was going to daycare, doing a junior kindergarten, it was called, in the Athletes Village. And so I spent a lot of time there. And it fits a lot of the things we've talked about: the open spaces, the programming, the recreational activities, access to services and playgrounds, and all that opportunity for social interaction. You just wanted to go and spend time there and visit it. And then as well, in terms of the mix of housing, it has the non-market housing, the social housing, supportive housing, right next to condos that are selling at $1,500 a square foot. So it's really a good example as well of that kind of diversity. And then lastly, Fort Langley. Without spending too much time on it, I think some of its strengths is about that historic heritage preservation and that strong sense of pride in the history and strong sense of community and community belonging. The quality of place and the aesthetic of the place, but also, again, it's got such a mix of housing options and lots of things to do. Those are some of its strengths. And with that, I will call it a wrap. Thank you.